You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. The world's first social media platform emerged nearly a quarter century ago, and our lives haven't been the same since. Today, 70% of the US population uses social media, and it's increasingly where we're spending our free time and communicating and connecting with others. Social media is permeating so many aspects of everyday life, and that includes our intimate lives. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Specifically, we're going to discuss whether social media is ruining dating. Some of the topics we'll explore include how social media can stoke feelings of insecurity, jealousy, and anxiety in relationships, how social media can undermine authentic connection by leading us to engage in performative relationships, as well as why social media is increasingly a terrible place to learn about relationships in general. At the same time, we'll also explore whether there are any potential positive sides of social media for relationships, as well as talk about tips for using social media in healthier ways. I am joined once again by Dr. Nicole McNichols, an associate teaching professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Washington. Nicole's course, The Diversity of Human Sexuality, is the largest and most popular course in the university's history, with 4,000 enrolled students each year. Nicole is the co-author of the textbook, Human Sexuality in a Diverse Society, and author of the forthcoming book, You Could Be Having Better Sex. This is going to be another fun and fascinating conversation. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. When it comes to good sex, confidence is key. When you're not feeling confident, it can become difficult to get and stay aroused. A lot of guys really struggle with this because when there's performance anxiety present, the brain starts getting in the way of the penis. So here's a solution for bringing confidence back into the bedroom. It's called Exerciser, and it's the world's best-selling penis pump with over 1 million satisfied customers. Exerciser harnesses the power of water through a hydraulic vacuum to draw blood safely into the penis and promote healthy circulation. Exerciser is the world's only FDA-regulated hydro pump, and it provides a discreet and effective way to enhance penile health and performance. Some of the benefits include improved erection quality, more staying power, and more intense orgasms. It only takes a few minutes per use and can easily be added to your regular bathing routine. The greatest benefit is typically felt after just 2 weeks of regular use, but similar to the gym, results vary by user and use. Exerciser offers a 60-day, 100% money-back guarantee, starting from the day the product lands on your doorstep. If the user is not satisfied for any reason, they'll receive a full refund. To learn more and get a 20% discount off of your purchase, check the show notes for the link or visit exerciser.com/SAP. That's exerciser.com/SAP. Okay, Nicole, let's talk about whether social media is ruining dating. So there's a lot that we could talk about here, but I want to start with some findings from a recent Pew Research Center report, which finds that many people struggle with how technology and social media intersect with dating and relationships. So, for example, nearly 1/4 of adults said that social media makes them feel jealous or unsure about their relationships because of the way that they see their partner interacting with other people online. So give us your thoughts on this. How can social media sow uncertainty about whether someone is really into you or not?
Well, I think that worrying about your partner's activity online is like 10% of it. I mean, there is so much mass confusion and insecurity that is bred by what ironically has meant to be a tool that's supposed to serve us by better connecting us. It's almost like communication has become too efficient. And as a result, it's so much easier to leave likes on somebody's story or a fire flame on somebody's story and have absolutely no idea, what that person meant by that particular like or fire flame, and spend hours analyzing it and trying to figure out what it means. And I just see students who come to my office hours and, many are trying to seek out my advice, about these issues. And I just see massive confusion and anxiety that's created. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I see it as well, right? Where if somebody comments on somebody else's story or even just follows somebody that they find attractive, right? This is something that people parse and analyze, and it creates this uncertainty, right? Because there's this expectation that, like, well, you're in a relationship with me, you should be into me. What are you doing following and interacting with all of these other people online? And I think the difference in this social media era is that we can now see all of those interactions. Like there's a paper trail, there's receipts for when you interact with other people, versus in the past when it was all in-person interaction, you didn't know if your partner, like what they might have said to someone else in private, because what was previously private is just now public for everybody else to see. And so, yeah, it's this complicated thing that I think a lot of us have no idea how to navigate. And it goes back to something we were talking about in the previous episode, where I think for a lot of young adults in particular, they've got these very high standards and expectations for their partner in terms of what is and is not acceptable behavior. And they like to see everything in pretty clear black and white terms. And it's like, well, you commented with a fire emoji on that person's hot photo of themselves that they posted. That must mean that you're into them instead of me. And so this relationship therefore can't work as a result of it. And it's like, really, are we going to make relationship decisions based on a single emoji?
Yeah. And I see also just massive confusion in terms of being able to interpret or gauge another potential partner's level of interest in terms of if they like my story, is that a big deal, right? Does that mean that they like me, right? Actually, maybe it's just that they like your story, right? Maybe it's, these different types of interactions have become so easy that it's really hard to tell what people are trying to convey, and I also see people who get obsessed with the follow function, right? Like they will literally go through and look at who their potential love interest is following and track changes day to day, seeing if they add more people that they're following or subtract people that they're following, and view that as highly diagnostic of their level of commitment. So I think the ways you can torture yourself are endless here.
Yeah, it sounds very masochistic to me to do that. Now, and this ties in with something else that was in that Pew Research Center report, which is that they found that about a third of American adults who were in relationships said they had snooped on their partner's phone before. And I think when you broke the data down by gender, it was actually over 40% of women and around a quarter of men who said they had done this. And I think a big part of the reason why people are snooping is because they want additional information or context for the interactions that they're seeing their partner have publicly with other people. So they want to see, well, what's going on in their DMs, right? If they commented with a fire emoji, are they also separately messaging? And is there something more going on here? And, that's a whole other issue when you start getting into the technological snooping, when you start going into other people's social media accounts, it's a very big invasion of privacy for one thing, and, probably going to create a trust violation in the relationship. And so, yeah, all of this, it's just something that I feel like many of us are just not very well equipped to handle, because this is all new to all of us. And so we don't know how to interpret it.
And I also look at it with, if you just look at today's dating culture in general, a lot of people, I'm thinking specifically, I'm not sure if you read Christine Emba's book, Rethinking Sex, and she talks about a blog post called The Culture of Chill, right? And this idea that what's considered cool is to not care, right? It's almost like a game of chicken to see whoever cares the least wins, right? It's really a game. And, this can just sort of, again, foster this environment where you're not allowed to ask somebody how they feel about you or where they see things going, because that gets branded immediately as being clingy or needy. And so as a result, you're forced to just rely on these social media interactions because, God forbid, you ask for any kind of clarity, you immediately feel like you're going to be viewed as a loser. So I see sort of the interaction between social media use and this almost weirdly avoidantly attached culture of dating, which I think is why when I poll my own students, an overwhelming majority report themselves, self-diagnose themselves as having anxious attachment style, right? Far more than what we know historically has been the case in nationally representative data. And, I say to them, maybe it's not anxious attachment style. Maybe it's this incredibly cool, emotionless dating culture that we live in that is going to make anyone with a pulse feel very anxious. And of course, what does anxiety do? Well, it then fuels this motivation to go back onto social media and try to figure out all the answers that you're searching for. So I don't know. I feel like it's just this vicious cycle that we're living in.
Yeah, vicious cycle. And, you're so right that there's so much about social media that is designed to make us feel anxious because that's how they keep their engagement with these apps really high. But maybe that's not necessarily a good thing for our dating and romantic lives. Now, another big challenge with social media and dating these days is the issue of privacy. We've all seen the social media videos of people posting about amazing dates and also terrible dates. And I think this really ups the pressure on dating, right? Because it can feel like you need to do something that's really over the top if you're going to take somebody out to make it Instagram worthy. And at the same time, you need to avoid really bad experiences that can potentially go viral. I'm thinking, for example, about the video of the woman who refused to go to the Cheesecake Factory with the guy who wanted to take her there on a date because she thought she looked too good to go to a chain restaurant, right? And so she filmed this whole interaction and posted it, and it was a whole thing, right? So talk to us a bit about this. How is the fact that people are constantly posting the private details of their dates, how is that changing the way that we're approaching dating?
We talk about sex going in the direction of being performative. Now our relationships are becoming performative. And you just start to lose the soul of genuine connection if everything you're doing is about how that date is going to look on social media, right? It's like, did I get that banner to fly across the sky and the video of it, me telling my partner how much I love them? Or do we have the perfect video of us at the amusement park going on the roller coaster? It's just ridiculous in terms of how anxious people can make themselves over feeling like this is more about how this relationship looks to other people rather than just genuinely expressing how you feel. And so again, it's sort of this paradox because people seem more willing to do these over the top gestures that will look good on social media, but yet they still feel too uncomfortable being genuine with the other person about how they really feel and what their, hopes and dreams and insecurities are about their relationship. So I don't know how to break out of that. It's definitely something I see too.
Yeah, well, I think that term performative dating is really spot on in terms of what's going on here and also why this is so problematic because it's no longer about the genuine, authentic human connection. It's about, are we doing something that's going to look good on video and then, post it as a story or whatnot. And, I also worry a bit about how people will post information about their bad, terrible dating experiences and often include identifiable information about the person that they were on a date with, right? Because I think, in a lot of cases, these were probably people who went on dates in good faith. Maybe it just wasn't a match and that's okay. But do you really need to drag the other person through the mud, right? In terms of doing that. And so I do worry a bit about kind of where we're going as a culture when it feels like we have to be so performative on dates because we need to look good for the socials. And if something goes bad, then that's also this big reputational risk for us because, there's that opportunity for things to go viral and then other people aren't going to want to date you, right? And it's part of our toxic modern dating culture.
It is, I know. And, as a mom, I have teenagers and, when I try to think about what type of advice I would give them going out into the world, I feel like my number one piece of advice to my students as well is to get off the apps, make it a real live connection as soon as possible. Either go on a date or pick up the phone and call each other. Otherwise things just get extremely confusing and no amount of performative, gestures are going to cure that kind of confusion if you're not both able to be honest with each other. It's interesting. I think that, back to your point about privacy, it's really kind of awful what some of these viral videos have done to people who, of course, you're not seeing the context, you're not seeing the background, you're not kind of understanding the full story at all. You're just seeing something that's, really kind of dramatic and making the other person out to feel totally horrible. On the flip side, I do see more and more people talking about maybe by normalizing bad experiences without invading that person's privacy, people can see that it happens to them too, right? Like I feel like there's a whole area of TikTok dedicated just to love bombing, where people talk about how there were these grand gestures in the beginning and then all of a sudden it stopped, and just the confusion that can go along with that, and how, ironically with social media, sometimes with these interactions, I think it also gives you this chance to project this idealized version of whoever the partner that you think they're going to be is. And, as a result, you get this crazy reaction where sometimes I think that my friends or students who have broken up with people that they dated for a very short time almost seem even more devastated than relationships that have broken up that were longer term. And I think it's because of all of these unknowns and all of this insecurity and lack of communication and realness. At least with a long-term relationship, with that ends, can be really sad, but typically you have some kind of closure and understanding of what went wrong.
Yeah. And it's important to recognize that, you can make anybody look bad or good with very selective editing, right? And so when you're seeing these contextless videos, you don't have the full story there. And, I think it's one thing when people use social media to try and call attention to or warn somebody about a person who might be abusive or who might be a romance scammer or other things like that, where, it clearly falls in the category of this is bad behavior, this is illegal behavior, versus when something falls in the category of they just made me feel bad, or, did something that could be ambiguous, that, maybe they had a different intent than how it came out. That's where I start to get a bit concerned about some of this stuff, because there's often a lot of miscommunications, especially in online communication. And, do you know what that person meant? And did they mean for it to come out that way? And we tend to not give each other any empathy, right? We just automatically assume the worst. And, this ties in with my next question for you, which is that I think, another big challenge here is that social media has kind of become the default form of relationship education. There are countless posts out there that tell us in black and white terms that this is healthy relationship behavior or this is unhealthy relationship behavior. And like I said, there are some things that are black or white, like abuse, but a lot of other things aren't quite so simple. And you get a lot of terms that get thrown around all the time, like gaslighting being one of them, that are used in all kinds of ways to the point where the term just doesn't really have any meaning anymore, because everything is gaslighting these days. But the problem I see here is that you've got so many non-experts who are diagnosing each other's relationships. They're telling them what is and is not healthy based on very limited information. And they're giving these overly idealized notions of, what a relationship should look like, to the point where it's like impossible for anybody to measure up to that. So yeah, tell us your thoughts on this. How is the information we're learning about relationships on social media affecting dating?
Yeah, no, I think that that's totally spot on, where I think people are just completely clueless about what healthy relationships look like, because they've just been fed all of these sound bites on social media. And gaslighting, you're right, has essentially completely lost its meaning. Gaslighting, I think, pretty much just refers now to anyone who has a different opinion than you do about their interpretation of what went down. The other thing I see all over the place is, this idea of ghosting, which, yeah, of course, being ghosted doesn't feel great. But what if it's a situation where, one person feels like they've kind of given the information that they're not interested, yet the other person just keeps persisting? At that point, maybe ghosting is the appropriate response, right? Or you see things like orbiting, right? Which I hear about, which is, the person who's lost interest.
What the fuck is that?
Oh, orbiting. Okay. Orbiting is when someone expresses a lot of interest, and then the relationship kind of fizzles out, but they keep like every now and then you'll get a text from them, or every now and then you'll get like a like on your social media post, or like a comment on your, or a fire flame on your social media post. And so the idea is that an orbiter is just kind of trying to keep you hooked because they want the self-validation, because they feel like they're not interested enough to be in a relationship, but they just want to keep you in their literal orbit. Maybe that's just called you had a relationship and experience and you liked each other, and you maybe don't want to date the person, but you still like them. And so every now and then you like their post, right? But we've like villainized this behavior, right? Or the other one, zombies. Do you know what a zombie is? Oh, okay. A zombie. See, my Gen Z students have taught me all these words.
I have a guess. I assume it means it like keeps coming back. You think it's dead, but it's, yeah.
Yep, exactly. So they ghost you, you don't hear them, and then all of a sudden they come back. And, again, that's something that in normal relationships happens. Relationships ebb and flow. Sometimes maybe somebody got busy and now they're back. But again, I feel like because these behaviors have been framed on social media as just evil incarnate, that as soon as that happens, immediate panic goes out and everyone starts telling you it's a toxic relationship, game over. Where does that leave us?
Yeah, it seems like we want to give every behavior a cute label these days and say it's a bad thing. But none of these behaviors are new. Like, they always existed. Like, ghosting was a thing long before social media ever existed. Like, it just meant that somebody never called you again, right? So yeah, none of this stuff is new. It just has new terms, new labels. And I think there is way more ambiguity, way more shades of gray to a lot of this stuff. Also in terms of something like ghosting, like, well, let's just say somebody kind of like disappears from your life. You never know what else could be going on in their own life, like what personal struggles or other things they might be going through. And I think there's kind of this idea, this expectation that if you send somebody a message that they owe you something in return. And in reality, like we don't know like what is going on in their life right now. It's just this complicated thing in terms of social media and how we navigate relationships is kind of like, what are the rules for all of this? And I think there used to be unwritten rules, like back in our day when we were younger. We'll call this the OK Boomer podcast. But it was sort of like the idea that, after a date, like you would call somebody like 2 or 3 days later, right? Because the idea was you didn't want to seem overly eager, right? So there was still this idea of like the principle of least interest, like where you don't want to show too much interest early on so that you don't seem needy. So you wanted to wait an appropriate amount of time. And it was like 2 or 3 days, right? But now there's sort of this expectation, this idea, like you send somebody a message on a dating app, like, or on social media, they're supposed to get back to you right away. And if you don't hear back from them right away, well, what the fuck is wrong with them? And like, they're gaslighting me. Like, well, why aren't they responding, right?
So Justin, I have a question for you that I've wondered about. Do you think, because really what we're talking about here is a level of entitlement, right? That we all feel entitled to be responded to instantly, to have somebody obsessed with us from the beginning. I mean, even that word obsessed is what everybody wants to, feel like in a relationship. Is that entitlement coming from a type of narcissism that, again, is being bred by social media, where we all feel like we're putting ourselves out there and it's all about us and it's all about being as self-absorbed as possible. And then we feel owed these things. So I don't know, or maybe we just feel more vulnerable because of social media. And so we give terms to these things to villainize it. I don't know.
And I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the anxiety, right? The way that social media cultivates those feelings of anxiety. And, when we don't get a response right away to something, it can easily make you start to question, like, well, why? Right. And, on a lot of the apps, like you can see, like, is this person active right now? And then you've got this clue, this indicator that like, okay, they're on the app, but they're leaving me on read. Like they're not responding to me. Like, what's wrong with me or what's wrong with them? And so it's easy to just start spiraling because you have all these different pieces of information that you don't know how to interpret. And, people tend to interpret it through the least generous way possible in terms of least generous to themselves and also to the other person.
And I think, again, that just comes down to defense mechanisms, right? And I mean, it's consistent with this dating culture of chill where people just feel that they're, anxious and not sure of where they stand. And it's, again, just about protecting yourself, but being made to feel anxious because being vulnerable has been so stigmatized today. So, yeah.
So much going on here. So, I think one of the other big challenges with social media is that even if you're not on a dating app, social media still functions like one, right? So you can be off the apps, you can be dating somebody, but an ex or even a random stranger might reach out to you to flirt. So even if you're not looking for something else, you might find yourself distracted by other suitors, creating opportunities for infidelity and also preventing us from settling down because new opportunities keep coming along. So, talk to us a bit about that, how social media can disrupt relationships by just kind of introducing this steady stream of suitors into the mix.
I mean, that's the thing is everyone shits all over online dating. I think the real culprit here is social media because at least on online dating platforms, you can indicate what you're looking for, right? Long-term relationship. And I mean, not to say that people, again, are always aligned in motivations, but for the most part, you kind of feel like you're all in the same boat. But social media, yeah, it has become sort of this new way to meet people. And you don't really know if, other people are looking for the same thing that you are. And back to this idea of paradox of choice, I remember reading a study that it's about 30 profiles. And if you sit down and you look at more than, 30 profiles, all of a sudden everybody starts to look less and less good on dating apps. I think the same is true with social media because you just have this illusion that there's tons of amazing people waiting out there for you who could be great alternatives. And if your relationship doesn't measure up, why would you settle down for that? Why wouldn't you just sort of like cut bait and go find something that can meet all of your needs? So it kind of ignores the fact that I always think that relationships are, soulmates are made, not found, and that it's really about putting the work into a relationship and connecting and growing together as well as, apart in your own interest, but really developing as a partnership, not just finding something. It's almost like social media has also like commoditized relationships because it's like we're going out and we're supposed to be looking for this one perfect thing. And if you buy the thing, but the thing that you see on social media, oh, wait, well, that one comes with these added features. Let me ditch the one I'm in now. It just creates, again, just sort of this constant situation where everybody's got one foot out the door.
It's also just been interesting being a social media user over the years. Like something happened like a few years ago. I don't know what, but it's like all of a sudden I started getting like DMs of people flirting with me or gotten marriage proposals a couple of times through social media, which, it's kind of funny, kind of cute in some ways, but it's also just like at some point this just kind of transitioned into like this app that I was using to connect with my family and friends to like suddenly it's acting like a dating app that I'm like unwillingly participating in, right? It's a different world. You don't know exactly what you're getting into when you sign up for social media.
And it's really all platforms. I mean, I actually have even been sent messages through like LinkedIn that are looking to, gauge my interest in something, we'll say non-professional.
Who is sending dick pics over LinkedIn? Like
over
seriously.
LinkedIn. I know, you would be shocked. Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. Well, Justin, okay, I feel like we have pointed out how anxiety producing social media is when it comes to dating. But I don't think it's going anywhere, unfortunately. I wonder if we can kind of put our brains together and come up maybe with our suggestions for people who are using it with dating in terms of maybe how to avoid some of the pitfalls?
Yeah, I love that question. Let me spin around and ask one question right before that, though, because I know we've been shitting on social media and saying all the bad things about it, but are there any good things? And so to go back to that Pew Research Center report I mentioned at the top of the show, one of the things that emerged in that report was that about half of young adults said that social media is actually important to them in terms of how they show love or affection for their partner. So some people do see a silver lining to it, and it's not necessarily always a bad thing. So I just wanted to ask first, like, is there anything currently that's good about social media, that can sort of counterbalance the bad?
Absolutely. Totally. And I mean, when you think about when the platform first got rolled out, I mean, it really was about connecting people and allowing you to stay caught up with other people. And I think that it can be used as a way to express affection, especially when it's, posts are being done in a way that's mutual and, you're sharing aspects of your day-to-day lives that, people who you are connected with but don't see every day might get to catch a glimpse of, which is fun. But again, I think that it can be something the same way online dating can be a tool that does foster connection. I do think social media can be something that's fun. I mean, it's also a creative outlet, right? I think that a lot of people just enjoy posting, whether it's pictures of them with their partner, someplace beautiful. It's just kind of a fun tool to use. It's a fun distraction. I think that the problem is when it becomes used as the sole means of communication and when it's really being relied upon as the only information source. That's when it, I think, becomes kind of toxic.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. All right. So going back to your question about how can we make things better, right? So in terms of thinking about some ideas about this before the show, because this was actually going to be one of my questions too, because I was like, we can't just shit on social media the entire time. We got to have some takeaway here. And, I think one of the things that could potentially help would be if people, who are dating or in relationships just had some discussions around social media use, right? Some ground rules, some boundaries, something, right? Going back to that Pew Research Center thing, one of the other big challenges people mentioned around social media was that they felt like their partner was always distracted by the apps and by notifications and other things. And, that's another whole part of all of this is that there's this divided attention. And so I think having some communication about what is the role that social media is going to play in your relationship is important. And I think that also goes back to the privacy piece too of what is and is not okay to post about our relationship publicly and what things are just for us versus what is for our family and friends or for random strangers on the internet to see. And, these are conversations that people almost never have, but I think could save us a lot of heartache if maybe we talked about it a little bit beforehand.
I agree. I actually think in a lot of ways, it's kind of like the advice that you might give to somebody who's trying to navigate a long distance relationship, right? Kind of like, well, how often are we going to talk? And what are some things that we could do to stay connected? I mean, it's actually similar conversations because it's, if, for example, I've had friends where, maybe they're really into posting, but they're dating people that are not as into posting. And, that could lead to a lot of feelings of insecurity if there wasn't a conversation first where, maybe there's an agreement where, okay, well, if you tag me, then I'll, repost it and add my own caption, but I'm not very good at, whipping out my camera. You feel more comfortable doing that. Or, are we going to follow, if we follow other people, to what extent should we just maybe have conversations instead of saying that, you can't try to follow this person and try to micromanage somebody's online behavior. Maybe it's more about saying, hey, I admit I felt kind of insecure when I saw you, that you're following and liking this person's post. Can we just talk about it because I just need some reassurance, right? And sometimes that's all it takes. And that's vulnerable to put yourself out there and tell your partner that that's what you need. But in a way, that's kind of what being a grown-up and being self-confident is about, is being able to assert your needs and not be embarrassed by that. Because, it's rarely about the social media post. It's rarely about the like. It's rarely about the follow, unfollow. It's really about talking at a deeper level about maybe how you're feeling in your relationship and are there ways that you can kind of overcome whatever other types of insecurities might be kind of lurking around.
Yeah, and I think communicating about your needs is certainly an important piece of this, but also avoiding the tendency or temptation to want to police your partner's social media accounts or behaviors and, tell them, exactly what they can and cannot do and who they can and cannot follow and what types of emojis they're allowed to use. And if you're going to get into that level of nitty-gritty detail, social media is probably just not for you, and that's not going to be a healthy dynamic. But, something else that I think could be useful in all of this is to think about using social media more mindfully, right? Because as we mentioned, there's lots of things about social media that tend to cultivate anxiety and they want to keep us engaged on the app and looking for more and more and more. Well, maybe that's also just for you personally setting limits on what your own usage is and which types of notifications you're going to allow and how much time per day you're going to spend on the apps, because it's very easy to just get sucked in and to fall into these negative cycles. And so by having your own personal limits or boundaries, you can help to reduce some of that social media anxiety that tends to pop up over and over again.
Exactly. I mean, and I know, just on a personal note, when I think about when do I start to just jump onto social media? A lot of times it's if I'm stressed and trying to distract myself or feeling like I'm bored. Those are different motivations than if you're going on kind of looking to have fun and really connect with people. And so I think back to your mindfulness point, if you can think to yourself, okay, am I really going on this because I'm curious to check out what everyone's up to and be entertained? Or am I doing this just because I'm anxious and want to go check and want to go, police my partner's behaviors? To say maybe there can be something else that you do right in that moment, rather than, our brain synapses and neurons get so into these patterns of check, compulsion. Maybe it's, that you go have a snack or I don't know, go online shopping, do whatever it is that is another form of distraction that maybe doesn't have the same type of pull.
Yeah. So maybe before you open the app, ask yourself the question of, am I likely to feel better or worse after I open this? And, if you're opening it to watch some cat videos, probably you're going to feel better. But if you're opening it to do some doom scrolling or to check up on somebody and what they're doing, odds are you're not going to feel good about it afterwards.
Exactly. And maybe just also try to remember that if that is your goal, if you're going onto social media to try to check up on somebody and see, try to pull this diagnostic information, you're really not going to get an accurate picture, right? I mean, you're not going to find the answers that you're looking for. You're just going to be going in this chase. It's going to pull you into this anxious spiral. So, again, understanding that and choosing other ways to communicate is probably a better bet.
I agree. Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Nicole. It was a pleasure to have you here. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work?
Thanks so much, Justin. I loved being here. And yes, please, you can follow my work either by following me on social media, Instagram or TikTok, Nicole_the Sex Professor. You can also follow a lot of my work if you sign up for my newsletter by going to my website, www.NicoleTheSexProfessor.com.
And I will be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. You can also follow me on the socials for daily sex research updates. I'm on Twitter and TikTok at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. And if you have a question you'd like me to answer on a future episode of this show, you can leave me a podcast voicemail at speakpipe.com/sex and psychology. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.